For more, we're joined now by the film's director, Gabriel London. He's just back from a hearing before the Florida Commission on Offender Review on Wednesday, yesterday, where he testified on behalf of Mark Defriest. The commissioners have all seen the film, and for the first time, they decided to meet again in just a couple of weeks to consider an early parole date for Mark Defriest. This is a major change for the commission, which has previously delayed his parole for as long as 20 years. Gabriel London, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you for having
This case is so shocking. So what happened yesterday in court?
I would say
Is it a court?
No, it's a public body known as the Commission on Offender Review.
Where?
It's in Florida. It's in Tallahassee. It was previously known as the Florida Parole Commission. Parole was abolished in 1984 in Florida and across much of the country. So it's interesting. There are still a number of cases that are essentially grandfathered in. Mark is one of those. And he comes up for parole consideration every 2 years approximately. They can decide anywhere between 7 and 1 year they can bring a case back. And they brought him back. They did a subsequent interview, and they basically said that rather than making a vote yesterday, they would like to bring the full committee back, because only with the full committee can they make a much bigger reduction in his parole.
Tell us Mark's story.
Yeah. Mark went to prison in 1980. He basically was 20 years old and had a dispute with his stepmother and the authorities over the will of his father. He didn't really understand the concept of probate, and this gets at a larger issue with Mark, the whole question of whether he understood the legal process and a lot of really the laws of people. Mark was gifted as a child, incredibly gifted, a savant, if you will, and really had these skills but no social understanding. And they tried for years, in a sense, to figure out what to do with him, and ultimately it was the prison system that stepped in and just held him tight for the last 34 years.
So he took his dad's tools that his dad had left him. In fact, it was his bond with his father, because his father taught him to use these tools. How did he become the Houdini of the prison system?
Well, it also goes back to his father. In a sense, Mark and his father had this deep connection that was really a mechanical connection. His dad had a history of having been in World War II, was an OSS person, really believed that the communists were coming, and he sort of prepared his child, his only son, his only child, in a way to be prepared for the Russians who were coming. And Mark grew up around guns. He grew up around, you know, essentially what he calls guerrilla warfare, this sort of avoidance tactics and theories that his dad prepared him in. And then when he got to prison, he felt like he should not be there. He didn't understand the sentence. He didn't understand the people around him and the menace that they represented. And he did what he had really learned to do as a child, and he escaped. He ran, he evaded the police, and you know, he stayed out for only about 24 hours. But what he was able to do, he swam a river, he hot-wired a car, and he was caught the next day in a motel without a shootout, without any further real incident. But he had made his statement.
Can you set up the scene in your film? It's when Dr. Berlin meets Mark for the first time.
Yeah. Basically, Dr. Berlin, who 30 years prior had said that Mark was faking mental illness, when I contacted him about the film, he essentially said, if Mark Defriest is still in prison, then I must have made a mistake. And that catalyzed a whole series of steps that led to him going to meet Mark in prison. And Mark basically came blinking out of solitary confinement, really wall-eyed almost, in a physical way that you can see. He's kind of heaving. He hasn't really seen people. He hadn't talked to people in 2 weeks. And he comes in and meets Dr. Berlin for the first time in 30 years.
Let's go to that clip.
Okay, I don't know if you remember me. We met back in 1981. I was a lot younger then.
I remember.
Let me just back up a little and start with why I'm even here today, lo, these many years later, because I think it would help you understand where I'm coming from. It was my opinion now that my opinion then was inaccurate. There were things I didn't know then that I know now that would have made me look at you differently. Everything would have been different. Are you okay talking with me?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to read each of these sentences to you one at a time, and then you're going to tell me if it's true or false for you. All right. I like mechanics magazines. Is that true or false for you?
True.
I have a good appetite.
True.
I wake up fresh and rested most mornings.
False.
Mark Defriest meeting Dr. Robert Berlin for the first time, the man who said he was faking his mental illness. What does it mean that he has changed his view? What did he say after this meeting with Mark?
Basically, Dr. Berlin, I think, got to do something that Mark and many people in prison should have the opportunity to do, which is to ask forgiveness and to be, in a sense, redeemed. There was a really interesting moment at the end of the scene where, in a sense, Dr. Berlin says, you know, there's things that you do and say when you're young that you later realize were wrong. And it's ironic as he stands across from Mark Defriest, who really made a mistake as a 19-year-old and made a series of mistakes after he went to prison. Largely, I believe, and I think many professionals believe, because of his psychological problems. But basically, Dr. Berlin has this opportunity to go back and right a wrong, and that's what we follow through the film.